Hi everybody, welcome back to the Time of the Signs. I'm Phil Koulis, and just a brief reminder, if you're enjoying this video series, be sure to click like and subscribe, and when you subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you'll get a notification whenever any new videos come up. So just a brief review of the videos that I've done so far. The first video is called the Revelation Roadmap. And in that video, I talked about the seals, trumpets, bowls, and woes, and how that defines the structure of the book and lays out the timeline in a very general fashion for the book. And it gives us a skeleton on which to hang everything else that we look at. Then I talked about what's called the roadmap rivets. And in the roadmap rivets, it shows where two things are joined together by the expression meta tauta. And that meta tauta means after this or after these things. And it literally links two specific events together. And this occurs like 9 different times in the book so that we can see that when one thing happens, it is immediately followed by the other thing. And that meta tauta is what the linkage is. There's also 67 occurrences of the word then, and I didn't go into that, but you can go back and look at that if you like. The third video was called Pin the Tail on the Antichrist. And I believe that that video was probably the most pivotal video to understanding that there is something other than the typical pre, mid, post rapture scenarios. And the pre, mid, post rapture scenarios are all based on the white horse rider of the first seal being the Antichrist. And I addressed that in a head-to-head competition with the other candidate, which is the pre-trumpets candidate for the Antichrist, Apollyon, who appears at the 5th trumpet in chapter 9. The next one was the Rapture, War, and Peace. And in that, I showed the diagrams and talked about the diagrams for the 4 main views, the pre and mid and post rapture scenarios, and then I went over the structure for the pre-trumpets rapture scenario. The next video was the throne room and the scroll ceremony, and we talked about what's seen in heaven at the time of the ceremony where the scroll is being opened, and there's some very interesting things that happen at that point. The next one was the structure of Matthew 24. Now, what this does is this looks at the 3 Olivet Discourse chapters in the New Testament, in the Gospels, that are Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. And these chapters all talk about basically the same things, but these things are not in an agreement with each other as far as the sequence of events. And what I do is I show how the revelation is the authority for the chronology, and all these other things can be added to the revelation to see where these things happen in time. The next one was the beginning of sorrows. That was the previous video, and we're going to review that next. One of the things that I try to do when studying the Revelation is, rather than starting out on chapter 1, verse 1 and trying to interpret everything as I go along, instead I've taken a different approach. And I've taken an approach of outlining the entire book without any interpretation whatsoever, and then going back and seeing how the structure of the book is laid out. And then once I understand the structure of it, then I can get the chronology, and then the things that we're going to interpret. You know, you can have different interpretations, but as long as the timeline is correct, then you can have a variation of interpretation. It may or may not be right. But it's important, most of all, to get the overall structure of the book so you can get the timeline down correctly. In the most recent video, I talked about the seals of the scroll. And in the seals of the scroll, we see 4 horses that come out. There's a white horse, a red horse, a black horse, and a pale horse. And the pale is the Greek word chloros, where we get the word chlorophyll from. And so that means that it's actually a greenish horse. And that's why you'll see in all my depictions that it's a white, red, black, and green horse. And then they all represent something. They all represent an aspect of the coming Antichrist kingdom. And I believe that the white horse represents government, and that being a one world government. and then the red horse representing a one world religion, and that one world religion being Islam. And the third seal, the black horse, represents a one world economy, and I believe that that will eventually morph into the 666, where no one will be able to buy or sell, and that happens at the midpoint of the 70th week. The fourth seal, the pale horse, that actually is given to us, and it says that it's death, and the death is something that Islam uses to make people submit. If you don't submit, then you're subject to death, according to them. The fifth seal is the martyrs under the altar, and the sixth seal are a series of cosmic disturbances. Now, if you look back, there's also a slide that I have that shows that the flags of the Islamic nations that are surrounding Israel are all the colors of the horses of the first four seals that are opened in chapter 6. And I believe that these correspond also to the beginning of sorrows that are depicted in chapters 24 of Matthew and Mark 13 and Luke 21, so the Olivet Discourse chapters. So one of the things that I want to stress is that the events of the seals are not wrath. They are things that mankind does to himself. Certainly, the fifth seal, the martyrs, are not the wrath of God. That's things that mankind does to one another. And so you'll see that chapter 6, the seals of the scroll, is not wrath. So this is not the 70th week. This is a time period that happens before the 70th week. And I believe that the white horse rider was a Barack Obama. And I believe that this character was out to conquer the mightiest nation ally of Israel, and using a jizya tax, which is a form of submission to Islam known as Obamacare, and this country is still reeling from that effect. And I've realized that him going out to conquer, with all the different things that are happening with the deep state activity of trying to go after President Trump, I'm realizing that the and to conquer may be that he goes out and to conquer his successor, which happened to be President Donald Trump. But I do not believe that this character is the Antichrist. And if you watch the third video, then you'll see that in the comparison that I did and Pin the Tail on the Antichrist, the white horse rider is not the Antichrist. It is interesting to note that the Muslim people, Islam, noticed that the name of the white horse that Muhammad rode, it was a flying white horse, the name of that horse was Barak, and I'm sure that that coincidence was not lost on them. They saw it. Now the next horse is the red horse, and I believe that that came out because of what we call the Arab Spring. It was ignited by a person that lit himself on fire in protest to police extortion. That spilled over into Egypt and then the rest of the Middle East, and now Syria has been devastated, and that is still a big, huge mess over there. And a lot of the people who lived there have now left and migrated into Europe and other parts of the world, and they're spreading Islam to other parts of the world because of that. And this is spreading like a wildfire. The next one is the black horse, and the black horse is an economic disaster. It basically says that if you can work for a day, you can eat for a day. So a day's work will give you a day's food. And so it's going to be very, very difficult situations for a lot of people all over the world. And indeed, the world banking systems are working to devalue the currencies, create hyperinflation and a crash of the economy, and they're undermining the value of currency with quantitative easing, inflating the dollar and taking away the value of the currencies, and then overburdening it with tremendous amounts of debt that we will never be able to get out from underneath. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when this is all going to come crashing down. And the last horse is the green horse, and the green horse is death, and it says that hell follows with him. So there will be a lot of people who are subject to death on this horse that rides. And one of the things we're going to have, because of the economic collapse, there's going to be famines, there's going to be pestilence, which is diseases, and diseases are spread by the most dangerous animal on planet Earth, and that's the mosquito. And the mosquito carries all sorts of viruses on the inside of it, and it can easily spread. Another thing that it says that, people will die by the sword. So there's going to be all sorts of violence, whether it be official violence from war, or whether it'll be civil violence, or just, people rising up and rebelling against each other and fighting in the streets, which we see a tremendous amount of. But also too, it says that one of the causes of death is death itself. And so when you consider that there's a financial collapse and people are barely able to earn enough money to eat, any medicines that they require to stay alive are not going to be available to them. A lot of the medicines that are out there, people just can't afford them, whether it be for diabetes or blood pressure or whatever it happens to be for. They may not be able to get their medicines, and it may bring their death sooner than if they had these medicines that kept them alive longer. In the fifth seal, we see that these martyrs appear under the altar, and under the altar they cry, "How long?" Well, this indicates that these people are asking, when's the end going to happen? So if they were in the 70th week at this point in time, they would know exactly when the end is coming, because the 70th week of Daniel, which is the final 7-year period, which sloppily is called trib or tribulation, which I absolutely do not like using that term. So I always refer to the 70th week Daniel because it is so precise a period of time. It requires a precise name and terminology as well. So these people that are up there that are martyred, they're asking how long? And so it indicates that they don't know. They are not in that very specific period of time. It hasn't come yet. So this, again, is another indication that the seals of the scroll are not the 70th week, that they are indeed the beginning of sorrows. The next one that comes up is the sixth seal. And in the sixth seal, there's a number of things that happen. There's an earthquake, there's the sun and the moon turning to darkness and blood, and then there's the sky receding like a scroll, stars falling from heaven, and then there's an earthquake where every mountain and island is moved out of its place. Well, that's going to slosh around the water quite a bit. And so there's going to be tsunamis everywhere. And one of the things that's interesting to note is that the beginning of sorrows in some translations is actually translated as the birth pangs. Well, if a woman is in labor with a baby and the water breaks, that means that the baby is really, it's coming quickly. It's not going to be much longer at all. And so we have this parallel to where it's like labor pains. It's like birth pains. And in the sixth seal, with this massive earthquake where it's moving every mountain and island out of its place, the water is going to get moved around quite a bit. And this could be the breaking of the water, meaning that the delivery of the baby is very soon. So now, Revelation chapter 7. Revelation chapter 7 is a very, very significant chapter in the book. Not that any of them are less significant, but this is the one that we've all been looking for. This is the depiction of the rapture that happens. But before that happens, we actually have another event just before it. And that event is where 144,000 from Israel are sealed with the mark of God. So let's take a look at that. In Revelation 7, verses 1 through 3, it says, after these things. That's a metatauta, so that means that is actually linked to the end of chapter 6. It says, after these things, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, on the sea, or on any tree. Then I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God, and he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels to whom it was granted to harm the earth and the sea, saying, do not harm the earth, the sea, or the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. So we have to take a look ahead just a little bit. And when you look at chapter 8, you'll see that there are 4 angels that have power to harm the earth, trees, and seas. And these angels are the trumpet angels, the first 4 trumpet angels. And so there's a warning to these people. Don't let these angels happen. Don't let these things happen to the earth until we get these guys sealed. So this is a very good indication that chapter 6 happens. There's a meta tauta, and then there's an indication that this happens between chapter 6 and the trumpets that happen. This is why we're calling this pre-trumpets, because it's before the trumpet angels sound. So before we proceed from here, one of the things that's important to understand is that in Daniel chapter 9, verse 24, Gabriel gave Daniel the prophecy of the 70 weeks. And this prophecy of the 70 weeks outlines that something very special is determined for Daniel's people and their holy city. Let's take a look at that. It says, 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. So these things have to deal with the Messiah, the first and second coming of the Messiah. These things have not all been fulfilled yet. And yes, it is interesting to note that there's a 7-fold heptadic structure to this prophecy, which is kind of interesting to note. So we can see from this prophecy that it's for Israel to complete the 70 weeks. It's not for the church. A lot of people think that the church goes through the 70th week, but that's not correct. The church does not replace Israel. It's for Israel and Jerusalem to bring in the Messiah, both on the first advent and the second advent. And there is an interval between the two called the church age. So at the end of the church age, we see Israel sealed with the mark of God on their forehead. There's 12,000 from 12 of the tribes of Israel. And the 12 tribes are listed in Revelation 7, verses 4 through 8. And I heard the number of those who were sealed, 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel were sealed. Of Judah, 12,000. Of Reuben, 12,000. Of Gad, 12,000. Of Asher, 12,000. Of Naphtali, 12,000. Of Manasseh, 12,000. Of Simeon, 12,000. Of Levi, 12,000. Issachar, 12,000. Of Zebulun, 12,000. Of Joseph, 12,000. Of Benjamin, 12,000. Now, some people will make all sorts of interesting discussions about why the tribe of Dan is not mentioned, but that's for a different discussion group. That's not something I'm going to address in this video here. But what I would like to address is something that has to deal with who exactly are these guys? Why are they sealed? And why are they sealed at this point? And what does that mean? Well, these are, if you look at the Jewish education system, this is something that I learned from Koinonia Institute, Chuck Missler's group, and specifically Dan Stolberger, who presented this education. And that is, in the Jewish education system, there are 3 levels of education that are given to the children for their religious education. The first level is the Bet Sefer, at ages 6 through 12, which is the introduction to the Torah. The second level is the Bet Midrash, ages 13 to 15, which is a continued education for those who show aptitude. And then there's the final group called the Bet Talmud, and these are aged from 15 to 30. And they are hand-selected by the rabbi for advanced education, leading to becoming a rabbi at the age of 30. So now, if this group were the Bet Talmud, then it would indicate that these are young people. They're young men, actually. We find out later in the Revelation that they are virgins. And so when are people virgins? They're virgins when they're very young, before they're married. So these are obviously going to be men who are sealed before they're married, and then they do not marry, and so they remain virgins. So what it may indicate is that they are in the age of 15 years or so, but yet in order to be a rabbi, they have to be 30 years of age. So that may give an indication of how long it will be between chapter 7 and then later on in the book when the start of the 70th week happens. It could be somewhere between 15 to 20 years after this point before the start of the 70th week. That doesn't mean the rapture is not going to happen soon. In fact, that's what we're going to cover next. An interesting thing about these 144,000 that may be mid-teens, and they're the Bet Talmud in their hand selected by the rabbi, it may be that the disciples, when Jesus called them, were in their early teens, mid-teens, somewhere in that time frame. It would explain a lot of their behaviors, but it would also go against a lot of the movies that you see where the disciples are all, old bearded guys with gray hair and very mature. But in fact, it may be that many of the disciples were probably in their teens or in their early 20s. So that's kind of interesting to consider, something along that line. And this is the moment we've all been waiting for. This is something we're all looking for. This is the excitement. This is what some people call the blessed hope. And that is to be raptured and to be in the presence of God in heaven. So let's read that. Revelation 7, 9 and 10. After these things, now notice that's another metatauta. That is a linkage that links the previous event, which is the sealing of the 144,000, to this event. So again, we have a one-to-one linkage that says after these things or after this. So we have a linkage from the sixth seal to the sealing of the 144,000, which happens to be before the trumpets, and then we have another metatauta, another linkage between the 144,000 and this multitude that shows up in heaven. So these are all three linked together. So this is a very tight time frame that this happens. So we can look at this, Revelation 7, 9 and 10. After these things I looked, and behold, a great multitude, which no one could number, of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed with white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, saying, Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. Hoorah! That's the moment we're all looking for. This is the depiction of the rapture in heaven. So I want everybody to notice something here that is very, very interesting. In Luke 21:36, Jesus said, Watch therefore and pray always that you may be counted worthy to escape all these things that will come to pass and to stand before the Son of Man. Now, escape all can equally mean two different things. It can mean not experience anything, and it can also mean not experience everything. So in Luke 21:36, where he says this parallels, and you'll notice that I've got the colors highlighted, this parallels Revelation 7, 9, and 10. And you'll notice that counted worthy, you'll notice where it says clothed with white robes and proclaiming salvation. They're crying out salvation. The next thing is to escape all. These are the ones who come out of the Great Tribulation. They don't experience the rest of the book. The book, we've already established, is in chronological order. It is in a very specific order. Seals, trumpets, bowls, woes, metatauta is the word then, and all these things that show the linear nature of the book. At this point in time, they do not experience anything remaining in the book. And so they're standing before the throne and before the Lamb. And he said, pray that you're worthy to stand before the Son of Man. So now it's interesting to note that this is the only two places in the entire Bible with these three common elements of being counted worthy, standing before, and having escaped all. This, in Luke 21:36, Jesus prophesied that, and this is the fulfillment of it. Now, something that's really interesting to notice is what these three common elements are in the opposite direction, because the people that are left behind in the sixth seal, that are in their underground bunkers, they proclaim the exact opposite of these three things. They say, and it says in Revelation 6:16 and 17, and said to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who is able to stand? So you'll notice that in these highlights, I've got to where the counted worthy is in yellow, being able to escape all these things is in green, and to stand before the Son of Man is in blue. So these people say that they want to be hidden from the face of him who sits on the throne. They don't want to be standing before, and they're not. And they say from the wrath of the Lamb, which is they're going to be experiencing these things. And they say, for the great day of his wrath has come. And who is able? In other words, they're not worthy. They're not able. And again, it says to stand. So in Luke 21:36, we're to pray always that we're to be considered worthy to escape all these things and stand before. And here is the group in chapter 6 in the sixth seal, that they realize that they don't have any of those three things. But yet in the next chapter, this is exactly what the people that are standing before the Lord in heaven are proclaiming. So it's a very interesting three-way thing going. You've got Jesus that prophesies it in Luke 21:36. You've got the people that are left behind in the sixth seal that are saying the opposite, that they didn't fulfill these things. And then you have the multitude in chapter 7 that is fulfilling the prophecy that Jesus made. And continuing on, one of the things that people say a lot, and one of the arguments that is the main argument against the rapture being in chapter 7, is that in verse 14, there is the expression that says these are the ones who come out of the great tribulation. And in the New King James, it has it as come out. In the King James Version, it says came out. And since King James was so prevalent and so well read by so many people, that they automatically assumed that came out indicated that they had gone through the 70th week, which led to the belief system that said that chapter 6 was the 70th week. And then you've got the overlapping of the seals, bowls, and woes all occurring within the 70th week, which is similar to the pre and post rapture scenarios. But when you look at it in context, it says that these are the ones that come out of the Great Tribulation. It implies that they come out because of the Great Tribulation. Just as the survivors on a sinking ship, they don't go down with the ship, they come off the ship. Yes, they're experiencing tribulation of the ship sinking, something terrible has happened, and they come off the ship, they survive. They don't go down with the ship. The same thing with if it's a burning building. People don't stay in the building while it's burning. They come out of the burning building. Yes, they've experienced the great tribulation of this building burning, and the building itself may collapse, but they come out because of these things that are happening. And when you look at the context of the book and the structure of the book, it clearly shows that this multitude comes out, and I'm inserting this at my own risk, but it's a understanding of the context. They come out because of the Great Tribulation. And I'm not trying to change the text. The text doesn't have because of. So that's my interpretation. And this is, I'm not changing the text at all, because I certainly don't want to violate Revelation 22:18 and 19, which is critically important. I don't want to do that. So let's go ahead and read that text. And the text says, All the angels stood around the throne and the elders and the four living creatures and fell on their faces before the throne and worshipped God, saying, Amen. Blessing and glory and wisdom, thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. Amen. Then one of the elders answered, saying to me, Who are these arrayed in white robes, and where did they come from? And I said to him, Sir, you know. So he said to me, These are the ones who come out of the great tribulation, and washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. So now you can see that the blue, the green, and the yellow highlights that refers to the worthiness and the ones that come out, and that they are the ones standing before. It all fits together. It all repeats the same theme. Now, another thing that I would like to address is that there are a number of things said about this multitude. In fact, there are 21 things that are said about this multitude. 1, they are an uncountable multitude. Number 2, they are of all nations. They are of all tribes. They are of all peoples, of all tongues. They are standing before the throne and the Lamb. They are clothed with white robes. They are holding palm branches. They come out proclaiming salvation. They've washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb. They are before the throne of God. They serve God day and night in the temple. God will dwell among them. They will not hunger anymore. They will not thirst anymore. The sun shall not strike them, nor heat shall strike them. The Lamb will shepherd them. The Lamb will lead to living water. And they are crying. And so one of the things that I wonder, why are they crying? Well, it could very well be that they take a look around and they see the people that are not there. They see the people that are their loved ones that didn't make it. They either died in an earlier time centuries ago and they are somewhere else, or they're in the rapture and these people are left behind alive on the earth to go through the end times that are yet to come. Either way, it should be a very, very serious warning to us that if we have people that we love, and who don't you love? Because you should love your neighbor as yourself. And who is your neighbor? It's the person that you're interacting with on a regular basis. You need to get outside of yourself and start talking to people about the reality of these things to come and the gospel of Jesus Christ, so that they don't get left behind or they don't perish without knowing God. It's very, very vitally important, because you don't want to be crying about a soul that you really care for that for some reason didn't make it. So that being said, one of the things that is interesting to note about the 21 things that are said about these people, is that it doesn't say that they're martyrs. Now, in the 5th seal, it says that the number of martyrs will be completed, but this group does not complete the martyrs. This group is anything but martyrs. The martyrs have their reward. They get to come to heaven and appear under the altar before this group does. So when it says the dead in Christ shall rise first, well, maybe that's what this means. Maybe that's an indication that the martyrs get first dibs on being raptured up and also being taken directly to the altar of heaven, where God is in his presence. So these are my thoughts on Revelation chapter 7. This is the time that we're all looking for. It is well before the 70th week. We haven't got there yet, but we're going to in the coming chapters. And then also too, we're going to go into a little bit about some speculation about when will these things happen. What is going to be the timing of this thing? Is there an event that's going to happen that's going to indicate it? I think so. I think the 6th seal is going to be a real good indication that things are happening. But is there some things that we can look at on the calendar and on the feast days and things along that line to kind of give us an idea, when are these things going to happen? It's probably not going to be as soon as we all hope. It's probably not going to be, any minute now, as the pre-trib people want to tell you. They want you to be all excited and they want you to be all worked up, and it's really hard to maintain that level of excitement and enthusiasm without eventually coming down and crashing afterwards. And Jesus told us to be ready. He didn't tell us to, be, having our bags packed and ready to walk out the door any moment and suffer from what I call rapture paralysis. Well, it's not just me that calls it that, but that's what it's called, rapture paralysis, where people are so fixated on the rapture happening any minute now that they're going to be completely useless for the kingdom, that they're not going to have people understanding what the gospel is. And that's what we need to be talking to people about, is the gospel of Christ and what it means for us, that salvation is available for us. So I don't want to get into like date setting or anything like that, because that's a disaster. That always turns out wrong. But at the same time, it's good to have an understanding of when could these things happen. Give us a reasonable time frame. And also too, let us be prepared. Let us have extra oil to go through this long, dark night ahead. Let's not be like the 5 foolish who think that, oh, it's instantaneous, I don't need to be ready for anything. No, let's do our preparations. Let's make sure that we've got our ducks in a row and that we're ready to endure for a much longer period of time than a lot of people are ready for. So we want to avoid overhyping the rapture, because what that's going to do is that's going to put in the minds of people that, oh, well, if the rapture doesn't happen as quickly as we're being emphatic about, that we're just being manic and, oh, it's going to happen any minute, it's going to happen any minute, pretty soon it's going to be like the boy who cried wolf. And then people are not going to believe it. And they're going to say, as it says in 2 Peter 3, verse 3, knowing this first, that scoffers will come in the last days, walking according to their own lusts, and they'll be saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. So we're going to have people that are going to be going, oh, well, see, you've been saying rapture, 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 and we're still here, so nah, Jesus doesn't exist, and there's no such thing. Yeah, there's going to be people like that. And I think when people overemphasize the rapture and they get all hyped up about it, and yeah, it's great to study prophecy and to see these things all unfolding and coming together. But when it becomes so fixated on rapture, and when you see people setting dates, saying, "Oh, it's going to be on this date. It's going to be real soon. Oh, it's coming next week. Oh, it's the next Feast of Trumpets," which is a very popular one. I happen to not agree with that conjecture, but they'll say, "Oh, it's going to be this particular day," and they'll get all wound up, and then it'll be like, "Oh, we're still here." And that's happened a lot of times, and a lot of people see that. A lot of people that are not Christians are looking and they're watching and they're studying and they're paying attention to people that make those kind of claims, and then they're continually wrong. Well, every time you make that claim and you're wrong, it discredits you, and it discredits the rapture scenario. It discredits even Christianity. So you got to be careful. You can't just throw these things out. You have to do a very methodic study, and you have to say, well, is there a time frame that we can look at these things happening? And that's where we're going to go next. So in the next video, we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about possible feast days that the rapture could happen. And then later on, we're going to go further into the book and study some of the things that happen in the trumpets, what happens when after Apollyon arrives, and the start of the 70th week, which is going to be quite a tremendous event. So until that time, God bless you. Have a good night, and I'll see you next time.